I actually want to start with something we were talking about a little bit earlier, MicroStrategy. Because one big conundrum is, why not just buy a Bitcoin? Why get it through something that's more levered like MicroStrategy, even if it's going to be joining the NASDAQ 100?
Well, look, what Saylor's done with MicroStrategy has been tremendous, and he's been able to utilize effectively the fixed income markets to, issue debt and acquire Bitcoin, now achieve a 2x premium on the NAV of the Bitcoin they're holding. The other thing is that there's a lot of investors that still, for whatever reason, can't buy Bitcoin directly, even via an ETF, and MicroStrategy has been the instrument of choice for them. So it's something that people like. I would say buyer beware in terms of being mindful of that premium. Bitcoin could continue to rally, and you could see MicroStrategy sell off and converge to NAV. But he has done an amazing job so far. I'll give him credit for that.
Outside of MicroStrategy, outside of Bitcoin, how do you feel about the prospects for other things like Ethereum? People are talking so much about this rise in Bitcoin, and I'm wondering if you just see as good opportunities anywhere else.
No, I mean, Ethereum has caught a bid here after trailing Bitcoin for a long time. It's the center of stablecoins. It's the place where you go to do DeFi things. It has the most TVL from a DeFi perspective out there. The NFT market is still largely on Ethereum. There's a lot of good things to say about it, and I think it will continue to do well here for the foreseeable.
Hey, Nick, I want to talk a little bit about a strategic Bitcoin reserve. A lot of folks we've been talking to over the last few weeks think it is something that is likely going to happen under the Trump administration. You're not one of those folks. Why do you not see one happening?
It depends what we mean by strategic reserve. If we're talking about a stockpile and just holding the Bitcoin the U.S. government has already seized, unclear how much they have right now. They might be selling off some of those coins. I think we can reasonably expect that to happen. Trump's been clear on that front. If we're talking about Cynthia Lummis's bill buying 1 million Bitcoins over 5 years, acquiring more Bitcoins for the U.S. government, or even potentially moving away from the existing dollar system to a Bitcoin-backed system, I don't think that's likely. I don't see support in Congress for that. Congress would have to authorize that. I don't believe that it would be prudent, frankly, for the U.S. government to signal a move away from the dollar system, move to a commodity standard based on Bitcoin. Any other nation state, it makes sense for them to acquire Bitcoin, and they are, Bhutan, El Salvador, that's fine. The U.S. is the issuer of the global reserve currency. We shouldn't do something that would call into question our own solvency. So even though I am a Bitcoiner, and it would certainly benefit me if the U.S. government started buying Bitcoin, I'm also an American, and I don't think it would benefit anyone if we were to shake confidence in global markets by implying that the dollar is at risk.
Well, as we mentioned, Bitcoin rising to a new record for a second day in a row today, hitting $108,000 per Bitcoin. I wonder, Nick, to what extent the optimism that we've seen is about potentially a strategic reserve from the U.S. government, or other optimism with regard to President-elect Donald Trump's policies when he does take office. If we do not see a strategic Bitcoin reserve or the government starting to buy Bitcoin, do you think we're in for a correction?
Yeah, I think that's a risk factor for sure. The hardest thing about being a Bitcoiner is you're in the trade with a lot of delusional people, right? And whether it's the stock to flow theory or now the strategic reserve, which I don't think is likely to happen, I think there is a bit of a risk that these elements are being priced in, and when there's disillusionment, it sells off. All that said, I said before the election, I thought it would hit 100,000 if Trump was elected. It has done that. Trump himself, he sees vindication in market action. I think he told Axios that he wants it to be 150K. You can fact check me if I'm wrong. Trump wants Bitcoin to go up to vindicate his pro-Bitcoin stance. He's a markets-driven guy. The shackles have come off this industry. It's a new era in Washington for the world. So the rally, I think, does have legs. I think it has fundamental soundness to it. But at the same time, we should be cautious of getting overly bullish about things like the reserve.
What is your price target then, Nick, for the end of next year? Because realistically, people have been buying the rumor. He's not at the helm quite yet. He's not able to put those new measures into place. The new regulators don't take charge yet. When they do, does that unlock a new wave?
Certainly, there'll be immense changes in Washington day one. Debanking will end. SAB 121 will end. The biggest banks in the U.S. will be able to custody Bitcoin crypto assets. The SEC will end its hostile posture. All these things are immensely positive for the domestic crypto industry and for Bitcoin. I think you'll see other sovereigns, maybe not the U.S., but other sovereigns come in and start acquiring Bitcoin. In terms of price action, it's hard to say. Bitcoin's an 80 vol asset. Long term, I'm looking for Bitcoin to match the market cap of gold, which would price Bitcoin at $900,000 a coin.
Mick, you mentioned some specific regulations coming down around cryptocurrency, the idea of debanking. And I'm wondering if you see potential risks ahead if that is indeed the case. I mean, Silvergate no longer around as a result of having too much crypto, I think it's fair to say. These regulations, people would argue, are here for safety. They're here to prevent bank failures or financial institution failures. What happens during the next downturn in crypto if a lot of these financial institutions are now allowed to have more crypto on their balance sheets?
Yeah, I mean, look, Silvergate and Signature, there's a long story about what happened to them. They weren't really holding a lot of exposure to Bitcoin directly. They were just banking crypto clients, and they died for it. Silvergate survived that run, but then they were told by their regulators that they had to reduce their depository exposure for crypto firms to less than 15%. So that basically killed them off. I'm not advocating for banks to hold Bitcoin in their asset portfolio directly. I'd like them to be able to engage in custody for their clients, and I'd like them to be able to bank crypto firms. And I think those are risks that banks can opt into. They can, understand that they're banking a high-risk industry. So far, they've been largely prohibited from that ever since the start of 2023, what we call Operation Choke Point 2.0. I think they should be free to choose. And I don't think the regulators should be ring-fencing this industry and saying you can't serve crypto firms at all. I think that's unconstitutional, and that has to end.